Game 65, Real Madrid versus RB Leipzig on the 6th of March 2024, titled The Gary Briggs Studio and Rattled Madrid. A short commute now to the famed Gary Briggs Studio. I'm the only one who calls it this. Why, may you ask? Well, Gary Briggs is one of my all-time favourite Oxford United players. I've only briefly met him twice and I would love to talk at length with him, but sadly Gary just gets on with life now and football is a thing of the past. He doesn't actually understand just how revered he still is in Oxford. In fact, my brother caught up with him at Fleetwood's ground recently, and when my brother had a chat to him, he was astounded that people still remember him. Gary came from Middlesbrough to Oxford as an 18-year-old and the second transfer, I believe, settled by the transfer tribunal. Could have been the first, but I cannot recall. And a legend was born that day. He came into a struggling team and aged 18, but was a man in the way he performed. This was the 70s. Oxford were a young, struggling side. The old heads around him were the likes of Hughie Curran, Colin Clark, Max Briggs and Brian Drysdale, who sported a full set of a beard which made him look 50, let alone playing age. Briggsy was a tall, wiry lad who set about central defending like a lad who had encountered every situation on his way through the ranks of an aspiring footballer with players who played through the 60s. You had to know how to look after yourself and how to dominate centre forwards. I cannot say for sure, but you got to the first team in any club by not taking a backward step. From 18 years of age in a struggling Division 3 club, now called League One, through to the First Division, now called the Premier League, Gary and his partner in crime, centre-back Malcolm Shotton, made it with what many purists might describe as limited ability. To this day, players who have played against Oxford from the era of greatness for Oxford United still talk of their fear of meeting these two. I suppose they were tough and uncompromising, but for me they knew what they were good at and did it. Single-minded when going for a header, often to the detriment of getting a whack or a cut. His philosophy of football defending was simple and effective. Briggsy and his mate might have flouted the laws of association football, but so did all the rest. Briggsy in his pomp versus Shearer in his pomp. I saw the legend that is Kenny Dalglish moaning all afternoon, so no doubt the Geordie legend would have too. Kevin Keegan couldn't handle the legend either. Now, before purists run off at the mouth at my hero worship of what sounds like a bit of a thug, it was football in that era type of thing. It was hard and uncompromising, so to succeed when all the sides had the inevitable hard man was a fitting tribute to this very humble off-field man. I am good friends with an ex-top flight referee who once told me of an on-field incident with the Mighty Mouse, Kevin Keegan. Keegan was the god or the darling of English football at the time and was playing for Southampton at the Dell, and early on in the game had effectively levelled, should we say, a player which was worthy of a booking or maybe more. And on coming over to the ref, and as the ref has told me, Keegan said, "Hold on, ref, these people have come to see me, not you," in a very condescending way, you know, that my shit doesn't stink kind of way. Only for Denzel, the ref, to reply, "Well, they won't be seeing you for much longer." So back in the box he went. So for all those who would level critique at an outstanding servant to my club, harder than Roberto Duran, think on. John Sadler, son of football columnist, wrote about Briggsy in his final years at Blackpool. Get down to Bloomfield Road and witness the last of a dying breed. He was that good. Basically, when someone shows that much desire for your club's shirt, they simply become legends. So that is why I call it with my old friend Mike the Gary Briggs Studio. I would still love to interview the man though, or just have a chat. If anyone out there can arrange it, please do. Tonight's game should be a formality for Real Madrid at home in the second leg to Leipzig, with a 1-goal lead from the first leg to boot as well. Well, Leipzig were excellent on the night, and whether it was a we have nothing to lose type of thing or not, they for the first half rattled the Spanish giants massively on their own turf. They missed 3 very good chances of note, with Sesko and Openda missing them. And you always sensed that Rattled Madrid would find an opening and make Leipzig rue those missed opportunities. And so it came to pass. A Bellingham break, a decisive through ball to Vinicius Jr. to finish and pop Rattled Madrid into a 2-goal lead on aggregate, and all that happened on 65 minutes. Surely that would end any reasonable doubt. Well, actually no. Leipzig came back through an Orban header to level on the night, and once again rattle Madrid and hand them to the final whistle. This game could be one that if Real Madrid do go on to win the Champions League, they will look back on being a pivotal match. I pack up my things and relax. The red light is off, and I reflect once again on any negativity in my performance. Did I call it right? Could I have done things better? Well, I'm sure someone somewhere will tell me. I lock up and think of Briggsy, and think of the others over the years that I have admired for their dedication and skill for my side. You know, I took some serious stick at school for my allegiance to Oxford United. I went to school when Oxford perennially lost in the first round of the FA Cup to the likes of Nuneaton, Kettering and Barking. So when at school with my scarf on, at times in utter desperation I stood tall for my club, whilst all the other kids used to turn up at school with the latest FA Cup winners' bags saying they'd always been a fan of the winners that year. So when we had those great years in the 80s, I fucking well enjoyed it, and it was fucking glorious to see other hardmen reduced by a wiry centre-half from Middlesbrough who never flinched when he took one. He actually didn't have too many team pictures without a cut or a bruise on his face. And now years later, when I mix with those players of that era who still remember those names, but not with fondness but with intrepidation. There is a very good autobiography called Who Are Stanton Are by Phil Stant, and he talks of his encounters with Briggs and Shotton. So don't just take my word for it, his is there in black and white. Luckily I have some VHS tapes which I need to transfer to a hard drive to reminisce, and if you want to look back at the Milk Cup final of 1986, you will see an incident where Gary Bannister raises his boot to the shoulder of Briggsy. He doesn't flinch. He looks at the marks on his shoulder and jogs away. Now this is at a time when cameras were not all over the place, but sometime later on the halfway line, in the background of a shot, Mr. Bannister is face down on the turf. I was sat on the halfway line with my wife at the top of the Wembley steps and saw the incident, and I know an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth saying isn't right, but I can assure you payback was in full. Many hard players never saw this man flinch. But to me he wasn't just a wiry hard man, he was a decent defender who defended in a world which is far removed from today's game. That was the era he was playing on, and he was brilliant at it. Rose-coloured specs again from yours truly? No, this time on my way home, memories. That is what they are. Fucking brilliant memories. Game 66, Freiburg vs West Ham on the 7th of March 2024. Titled Ginter, Gunter, Hofler, Hurler. The Europa League tonight at the Gary Briggs Studio, a day of work and prep. One thing when you have two different occupations, that it's all too easy to just want to do the one that comes naturally without thinking, as opposed to the one which is hard to deal with for a variety of reasons. So today, schoolboy Selfie is looking out the office window, daydreaming, and take on the hard aspects of designing a disabled adaptation. Wondering how to make ends meet in a world I would like to be in all the time? Am I too old for this malarkey? Possibly, but there are always dreams. It is only when you stop dreaming your life is over. Everyone wants something they can never actually get. When I do daydream, I tend to react to the said period of daydreaming in a slightly angry way with myself at wasting time. Give a man a stick to beat himself with, and I will. Now looking back at the time wasted and knowing I cannot get it back in terms of falling behind with my work, and the self-fulfilling loathing of myself becomes an easy path to go on. So now annoyed with myself, I prepare for the more enjoyable aspect of my life, talking about football as it unfolds in front of your eyes. I don't see it as a skill set though, it's just for me a natural say what you see job. It is a bit like a photographer of sports. Trying to capture that image for me is hard, as I tend to look away from the viewfinder at the action instead of through the viewfinder to capture it. Every job has a skill set, whether it's mundane or complex. I know some very knowledgeable people who cannot handle everyday life, and some people who are so dexterous but cannot read and write confidently. Is being a commentator easy? I don't know. It can be draining, and I know it's a performance really, and I know we're all there to be subject to a listener or viewer's thoughts or opinions. But for me, I get paid for doing something I enjoy, watching sport and talking about it in my own inimitable style. Why lie? If players end up in a bodily entanglement that sort of looks as though it belongs in a porno film, then that paints a picture. What picture may well be down to your mucky mind, but if it raises a smile then so be it, and if it gives some context, well that's great too. If an overpaid prima donna falls to the floor flopping around like a fish out of water after being poleaxed by a stray fingertip, I will tell you what I see. Players know all too well if there's bodily contact in the penalty box to go down and make sure the referee has a decision to make. even though this strapping 6'2" man who was an elite athlete who works out has only been caressed by the faintest of touches to have to go down and look at the turf below him. When I was a child, my parents would say, "What are you crying for? I'll give you something to cry for if you don't stop." Well, substitute that with, "I'll give you something to go down for." Mucky minds stop there. But if I can translate what I see to you, the listener, with a take on the scenario that helps you understand, then my job is done. I blame a lovely man called Ambrose for my belief in my style of commentating. I had a brief introduction with radio with a little fan punditry. This had been heard, and encouragement by others saw me look into hospital radio for radio work. Anyway, to cut a long story short, my dear, I did a Wednesday night show on the hospital radio and used to go into the press box and record my commentaries to a recording machine. I would sit away from people due to possibly being embarrassed with what was a new departure for me. But I used to listen back and was surprised with how I called the big moments, so I gave myself a little pat on the back. Yep, you heard me right, my biggest detractor giving myself a pat on the back. But it was still me saying I was good enough, not anyone else, so it didn't really count. Anyway, after a few games had passed, a gentleman from the club and his wife, and other club persons whose match day tasks were suddenly over, started sitting around me whilst I commentated into my little machine. It was a little daunting, and so one day I asked Ambrose why they chose to sit close, and I was feeling a little intimidated. His reply was that he enjoyed my commentary far more than the local radio station's commentary. That in itself was enough for me to believe a little more in what I was doing. Thank you, Ambrose. Everything is subjective, and I've been told by my son I have a nice singing voice, and he works in the West End, but he is my son. If Andrew Lloyd Webber or Simon Cowell says I can sing, I might just believe them, or my mind will say they're just taking the piss. I know I often sing on these podcasts, but it isn't my best voice. This is the inhibited Journeyman commentator singing. Anyway, into the studios, prep laid out, microphone test done, and some last minute research, i.e. going over the same stuff again just to make it lodge up top. Team news appears, and then formation laid out on my paper as to who will face who theoretically on the pitch, which individual battle needs winning or losing. Hold on a minute. My penchant for speedy delivery and my utilisation of phrases and whimsy, Freiburg could cause me an issue. We have two players called Gunter, which has an umlaut over the U, and a player called Ginter. Then we have a Hofler, which doesn't have an umlaut over the O, and a Hurler, which does have an umlaut. These sadly compromise my mind, and it takes it upon itself to simply group these four names together to cause mental anxiety ahead of kick-off. You see, it's these little foibles that cause commentators issues, as well as player recognition and numbered shirts on striped or hoop backgrounds. So as a commentator, the view, whether in situ at the ground or off tube, is side on. Now, in one of my first live commentaries, it was a red and white hooped shirt with black numbers on the back for the away side, who I'd never seen before, and they defended the goal to my left. Their two centre-halves wore numbers 15 and 25. They both had shaven heads and some tragically coloured boots, but they were the same colour. The central midfield pair wore 4 and 14 and were similar in build and hairdos. Now, as they play across me from my left to my right, the right-hand side number is the only one in view. This means most of the time I can only see the number 5 on the centre-backs or the number 4 on the midfielders, and that is when you can make out the numbers on red and white hoops with black numbers. But enough of my first world problems. Gunter, Ginter, Hofler, Hurler. I just pray there won't be a quick passage of play between these four that leads to one scoring a goal. But now, having said that, the odds of it happening are slashed. The game itself is a little West Hamish of 2024 in terms of they are safe in a game they could win without trying to win it and then losing out to a goal late on. VAR has its say for a possible penalty to the Irons late on, but surprise, surprise, although the ref went to the monitor to look, decided to stick with his on-field decision, much to the surprise of most of us onlookers and commentators. VAR can easily perplex commentators, and its usage and implementation, no more needs saying. It's a bit like getting a loan for a car over 5 years and after 2 months realising you've made a mistake. We are stuck with it now. For this company we are monitored, and yes, they mark our performances. I don't often like to look, but as an English-speaking commentator for a Czechoslovakian company, the comments are often a little blunt in terms of reviews. I don't think I had a choice, but English is not their first language, if you know what I mean. The following criteria are given marks: emotion, audio quality, commentator content, fluency of speech, description, an overall impression. I score a full set of 5 out of 5s, which is nice. Does it mean anything whilst it's 5s? It doesn't mean a jot. If it's lower, it's the end of the world as we know it. Having done some 110 commentaries for them with an overall score of 4.6, I suppose I'm doing okay. Don't forget game 1. I was hooked at half-time for coughing my lungs up. I certainly didn't get a 5 that game, but I did have the end of a cold. Home and in bed, mask on, not a gimp mask for anybody out there, and off to a world of no consequences. Daydreaming whilst in a sleepy state. The bed's lovely, but let's see what mood my mind will wake me up with.